In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, August 11th, here in South Korea. Typhoon Khanun takes its departure from the southern part of the Korean peninsula in the early hours of this Friday, but leaves behind rampant property damage and persistent rainfall. Meanwhile, expectations are mounting about the possibility of a regular summit among leaders of South Korea, Japan and the US ahead of their gathering at Camp David on August 18th. And the 25th World Scout Jamboree is scheduled to come to a grand finale later on this Friday evening with a spectacular K-pop concert featuring big names and their greatest songs. We start in the Greater Seoul area as part of efforts to offset potential rain-related damage. Amid the presence of typhoon, authorities here opened their floodgates to better maintain the water level of the Hangang River starting Thursday evening. For more, I have my colleague Choi Seong joining me live with the latest. Seong, do fill us in.
Well, Sunny, I'm here at Paldang Dam right now in Hanam, Gyeonggi-do Province, which controls the water levels of the Hangang River. As Typhoon Khanun moved northward, it brought heavy rainfall to the Seoul Metropolitan area, leading to a rise in the water level of the Hangang River. Here at Paldang Dam, last night at 10 p.m. when Khanun was passing through Seoul, the Han River Flood Control Office began releasing over 2,000 tons of water per second, twice the usual amount of discharge. The current water level at the Paldang Dam is around 24 meters below the critical level of 27 meters. As Khanun crosses over to North Korea overnight, there were concerns about the potential for surprise water releases from North Korea's Paldang Dam on the Imjingang River due to the heavy rain. The office here maintained an emergency response system throughout the night in preparation, but as of now, there have been no surprise discharges and the situation remains stable.
Right, I see. Well, that's good to know, Seong. Now, the typhoon has left, but I hear sporadic showers remain.
Yes, Sunny, Typhoon Khanun has weakened and moved into North Korea, but in Seoul and here in Hanam, we are still seeing rain. According to the Korean Meteorological Administration, 20 millimeters of rain per hour has been pouring down in some parts of the capital region. Also, Seoul is expected to see 5 to 14 millimeters of rainfall until Saturday, while the northern Gyeonggi-do region is forecast to receive 20 to 60 millimeters of rainfall. The typhoon is expected to be recorded as an unusually long-lasting typhoon. Khanun is the only typhoon that has stayed over South Korea for more than 12 hours, with the exception of Typhoon Solik in 2018. Currently, Typhoon Khanun has weakened near Pyongyang in North Korea, and as of 11 a.m., all typhoon warnings nationwide in South Korea have been lifted, and there are no road closures in downtown Seoul. The KMA said that by Sunday, the entire nation will be moving out of the typhoon's influence and heat is expected to return. That's all I have. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Seong, thank you for that report. That was our Choi Seong reporting live from the Paldang Dam in Hanam, Gyeonggi-do Province. Now, Typhoon Khanun may have made its exit from South Korea, but it leaves behind a trail of damage and, tragically, one loss of life thus far. For more on this, I have our Kim Jung-shil standing by live on the line. Jung-shil, what is the latest?
Well, Sunny, no additional casualties have been reported by the government as of 11 a.m. this morning. But as you said, a 67-year-old man was killed after being swept away by torrents in Daegu, and another man in an electric wheelchair went missing after falling into a small stream also in Daegu. A police investigation is underway as both accidents are classified as safety accidents instead of typhoon-related.
Right, I see. And our prayers, of course, to the families. Meanwhile, Jung-shil, I hear property and infrastructure damage have been rampant. Do tell us more.
Yes, that's right, Sunny. The government says there are more than 360 cases of damage across the nation. Much of the damage to roads and public facilities was in South Korea's southern city of Busan, and flooding damage to houses were reported in Gangwon-do Province and Daegu that saw heavy rain yesterday. And here is some of the pictures that can give you an idea of just how powerful the typhoon was in Koje City in the south. Bricks fell down from an apartment building on Thursday morning, damaging multiple cars underneath. And thankfully, no one was hurt. And also, there have been multiple reports of trees falling on the side of the roads, blocking traffic. You can see that the roots of the trees are completely out of the ground. And speaking of trees, I want to mention a South Korean natural monument that was damaged due to the typhoon. Parts of a multi-stem pine tree in Gumi City was damaged due to the typhoon yesterday morning. The tree is thought to be around 400 years of age and is considered to be one of the oldest multi-stem pine trees here in Korea.
Right, Chung-shil, a very unfortunate event, if I may say so myself, of course. How is the government maintaining its disaster management then?
Well, President Yoon Suk-yeol this morning ordered efforts to help the recovery for people who were affected by the powerful typhoon. Nearly 16,000 people had to evacuate from their homes yesterday, but 70% of them are now back in their home as of 11 a.m. The president reaffirmed that taking preemptive measures to control roads and evacuation is the principle of disaster control.
Right, and before you leave us, Chung-shil, what is the latest with regard to travel on rail, in air and at sea as of this Friday?
Well, Sunny, I can tell you that KTX and all other trains are operating on a normal schedule from this morning. Airplanes have also resumed flights across the nation since yesterday afternoon, and most ferries are also back running with few exceptions on the East Coast and Incheon area as the region is feeling the final effects of the typhoon. That's all I have for now. Now back to you, Sunny.
All right then, Chung-shil, thank you for that coverage. That was our Kim Jung-shil reporting live from the news center. In other news, Seoul, Tokyo and Washington are reportedly looking to launch a regular trilateral summit that meets at least once a year, and an announcement to this end will be shared during next week's talks at Camp David. Our senior presidential correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
The leaders of South Korea, the United States and Japan are planning to meet at least once a year for trilateral talks and hold joint military exercises to deter North Korea's nuclear threat. That's according to a US diplomat Thursday, who said the three countries are close to finalising a joint statement to be issued at Camp David after Presidents Yoon Suk-yeol and Joe Biden and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida hold talks next Friday. US Ambassador to Japan Ram Emanuel told Japanese media that the joint document is being finalised and will include holding a yearly trilateral leaders meeting separate from international conferences. He said the leaders are also looking to conduct annual trilateral joint training between their militaries as North Korea continues to develop nuclear weapons and missiles and China strengthens its maritime advances. The three leaders will also strengthen intel sharing and cyber cooperation, as well as touch upon economic security. With such agreements expected to, quote, change the strategic landscape of the Indo-Pacific region, Emmanuel added that a separate vision statement will be released, taking trilateral collaboration into a new phase. This comes amid speculation that the three countries are working to build a mechanism for three-way cooperation, although it is unclear whether the joint statement would mention China or to what extent it would be alluded to, given the geopolitical sensitivities in the region. According to US Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security, Ellie Ratner, the Camp David meeting isn't just about getting together and having dialogue and sharing views, but would also seek innovative ways to regularize trilateral cooperation. On that note, Seoul's National Security Advisor Cho Tae-yong told reporters last Friday that a consensus is being formed on holding the yearly trilateral gatherings and that the outcome will likely materialize after the leaders' discussions. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Also, Seoul, Tokyo and Washington have called for a UN Security Council meeting for August 17th to address Pyongyang's human rights atrocities. Now, should such a gathering take place, it will mark the first time a North Korean human rights meeting is held at the UN Security Council since the year 2017. According to US Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, on Thursday, North Korea's rampant abuse of human rights is closely linked to broader regional peace and stability. Now, North Korea has repeatedly rejected allegations of atrocities, asserting instead that sanctions are to blame for its dire humanitarian situation. The head of the organization overseeing a universal ban on nuclear tests has voiced hopes for North Korea to refrain from conducting a seventh nuclear weapons test. Our foreign affairs correspondent Pyeon-jae covers his remarks.
North Korea's commitment to a moratorium on nuclear testing or signing the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty could be the first step to building the trust needed to lead to peace and security on the Korean peninsula. That's according to the head of the CTBTO, a global body that promotes the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. While noting that the nuclear test site in North Korea appears to be ready for use, he said the decision of whether or not to carry out another test lies with the North Korean leadership, and that the pathway to the future has got to be through dialogue.
I would call upon North Korea to do the responsible thing and commit with the rest of the nations of the world to a moratorium on nuclear testing.
North Korea conducted its sixth and last nuclear test in 2017. It declared a halt to all nuclear and ICBM tests in April 2018, but broke its self-imposed moratorium last year by resuming long-range missile tests. Based in Vienna, Austria, the CTBTO is responsible for seeking to establish a ban on nuclear testing and has more than 300 monitoring stations around the world to detect signs of a nuclear explosion.
So to the people of the Republic of Korea, we can say to you is that an explosion, a nuclear explosion in North Korea will be detected no matter where it is or when it takes place.
He also stressed that South Korea has been a strong supporter of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty from day one, and that the partnership is getting stronger. South Korea signed the treaty on September 24, 1996, and ratified it on the same day. Adopted by the United Nations in 1996, the treaty has near universal support, but has not been put into force, as it still needs ratification from 8 specific countries. The US, China, Egypt, Iran, and Israel have signed the treaty but not ratified it, and North Korea, India, and Pakistan have not even signed it. Meanwhile, on the public debate over whether South Korea should acquire its own nuclear weapons to deter threats from North Korea, he said the country has been taking a bold and responsible position to continue to call on the world without nuclear weapons. He added this has been a consistent position of the Korean government that is very much appreciated. 배은지, Arirang News.
A rare deal between Washington and Tehran is seeing a prisoner exchange and access to billions of blocked funds for Iran. Our Choi Min-jung has details.
The United States and Iran have reached a deal to swap prisoners, marking an encouraging development in their rocky relationship. Sources familiar with the matter said the two countries have reached an agreement to free Americans in exchange for several jailed Iranians in the U.S., as well as access to billions of U.S. dollars in Iranian funds frozen in South Korea. The U.S. State Department on Thursday confirmed that its citizens were released from prison and are currently under house arrest in Iran.
First, it's a positive step that they were released from prison and sent to home detention. But this is just the beginning of a process that I hope and expect will lead to their return home to the United States.
It's reportedly known that the 5 Americans will be allowed to leave Iran once Tehran secures the $6 billion worth of oil payments frozen in South Korea due to U.S. sanctions. According to the Iranian Foreign Ministry, the process of releasing the funds is underway. However, the U.S. clarified that the funds could only be used for humanitarian purposes, like buying food or medicine.
Iran's own funds would be used and transferred to restricted accounts such that the monies can only be used for humanitarian purposes, which, as you know, is permitted under our sanctions.
The rare deal between Washington and Tehran reportedly comes after at least 2 years of negotiations. Though it is viewed as a positive step to their relations, there is also criticism that the funds allocated for humanitarian goods could be used for Iran's nuclear program. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The 25th World Scout Jamboree is coming to a close later on this Friday with a much-anticipated K-pop concert at the Seoul World Cup Stadium after an eventful fortnight here in Korea. Our An Sung-jin has details.
The 25th World Scout Jamboree will come to a close on Friday with a K-pop Super Live concert and a closing ceremony at the Seoul World Cup Stadium. The closing ceremony is set to begin at 5:30 p.m. and will be followed by a K-pop concert from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. 19 acts are set to perform, including NCT Dream, Mamamoo, New Jeans, Monsta X's Shunwoo and Hyungwon, The Boys, ITZY, and other K-pop groups. Actor Kong Myung, ITZY Yuna, and Hae-in from New Jeans will host the show. The concert was initially set to take place last Sunday at the World Scout Jamboree's campsite at Saemangeum, but it was rescheduled for Friday at the Jeonju World Cup Stadium, an hour's drive from the campsite, because of heatwave and weather concerns. However, with fears over Typhoon Khanun, the venue was changed again, this time to the Seoul World Cup Stadium. About 1,000 buses carrying the Jamboree participants will arrive at the stadium between 2 p.m. to 5 p.m., spaced out to avoid congestion. Police will be on duty to further manage traffic in the area.
First and foremost, safety is the most important thing. Today, we have to transport a large number of Jamboree attendees. Please pay special attention to the security of the crew and the participating artists, as well as the food and maintenance at the venue. Double-check stage equipment and facilities.
The Ministry of Health and Welfare, as well as the Seoul Metropolitan Government and the Fire Department, prepared 4 on-site emergency medical centers and 10 ambulances in case of emergency. About 40 medical personnel will also be on site. Han Sung-jin, Arirang News.
On the economic front, Korea is reportedly noting some ease in slowdown amid recovery in exports, especially those of chips. Now, this is according to Seoul's finance ministry on this Friday in its latest Green Book, which made note of Korea's trade surplus for the second month in a row in June as imports dropped deeper than exports. The ministry expects a third month of surplus when figures for chip exports of July are tallied. Separately, the country's consumer sentiment index also rose 2 percentage points in July on month. Meanwhile, U.S. inflation accelerated 3.2% in July on year, and while it has ticked higher for the first time in 13 months, pundits point out details within the latest data show continued consumer price moderation. Our Lee Seung-jae explains.
According to data released Thursday by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. consumer prices rose 3.2% on year in July, up from June's 3% increase. Despite the acceleration, the figure still fell below economists' expectations of 3.3%. While the pace of consumer price increases accelerated on an on-year basis for the first time in over a year, it was largely due to year-over-year comparisons to July 2022, when monthly inflation turned negative. On month, prices rose 0.2% due to rising shelter costs, which accounted for 90% of the total increase. Core CPI, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, also increased by 0.2% on month and 4.7% on year, the lowest since October 2021. This was below the Dow Jones's estimate of 4.8%, all of which still signals that inflation is on a downward trend despite the slight acceleration. Food prices rose 0.3% month on month, while energy prices saw a rise of only 0.1%. The latest data shows that while inflation has significantly dropped since the 40-year highs since last year, it's still above the U.S. Fed's target of 2%. While the figures might not be enough to lead the U.S. Central Bank toward cutting rates just yet, it may signal a rate freeze in the FOMC meeting slated for September. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Samsung today is releasing its latest premium smartphones, the Galaxy Z Flip 5 and Fold 5. They will be available in 50 nations by the end of September. Samsung's new devices have been breaking records for pre-orders, outselling previous models not only here at home but worldwide. Over 1 million units have been sold here in Korea between August 1st and the 7th, which marks a fresh pre-sale record for foldables. Interest in insuring people as well as their property from extreme heat-related repercussions has been growing in recent days amid sizzling temperatures. Our Moon Hae-ryun has this report.
When you think of extreme weather conditions, what image comes to mind? With the heat wave that's been gripping the country for the past 2 weeks, insurance companies and the government are working to provide financial support and compensation for damage that's been wrought by the weather, not just limited to flooding. This insurance company has recently released a new insurance package that's been garnering attention amid the increasing number of heat-related illnesses like heat stroke, as it covers health problems specific to different seasons.
You can receive 300,000 Korean won, or roughly $228 with this insurance plan if you are diagnosed with a heat-related illness such as heat stroke or heat exhaustion at a hospital or general medical practice.
But it's not just people that are suffering in this weather. Livestock such as the goats here have also been affected. Extreme heat causes them to become more aggressive and prone to fights among themselves due to stress. Combined with the physical effects of heat such as loss of appetite, the heat wave has resulted in losses that farmers with smaller farms have been unable to be compensated for.
Many goat farms in South Korea are run on a small scale, so we can't join the Disaster Livestock Insurance Plan.
The current disaster livestock insurance plan in South Korea is run and regulated by the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. And bee farmers too have found issues with it during their battle with the heat, as bees die from being unable to regulate temperatures inside melting hives.
Although bees are on the list of livestock that can be covered by the livestock insurance plan, it's impossible for us to claim compensation because, unlike cattle, we can't count the number of bees that have died. It's also not like all the bees die here. Some will die away from the hive.
The heat wave follows weeks of heavy downpours which cause damage to farmland and farm buildings, such as at this chicken farm. It's also far more humid this summer as a result of the rain, which means that diseases are being passed around more easily, as well as rendering water cooling systems like this useless.
Diseases like avian influenza are covered by the government insurance, but there are a lot of infectious diseases like the IBD that chickens are prone to that aren't.
So I visited the Agricultural Ministry to find out more about the current insurance plans available to these farmers. This plan was first made available in 1997 and has since come to include 16 different categories of livestock, including cattle, pigs, chickens and sheep. The number of farms that have applied for this insurance has grown steadily over the years, but grew exponentially in 2022, with the number of farms signed up to this insurance jumping by nearly 50%. The government is well aware of the problems raised by farmers and plans to implement necessary changes.
We currently cover the primary effects of natural disasters like heavy rain or heat waves, but we're also running a trial with insurance policies to cover infectious diseases among livestock by starting with cattle from 2021 until next year.
With climate change having a global impact, the ministry is benchmarking insurance policies abroad.
Disaster insurance is becoming important as a result of more frequent adverse weather conditions. That's why we're monitoring insurance plans in countries where this is already well developed, like the United States, to help improve our own.
As countries continue to grapple with the intensifying effects of global warming, collaboration across borders to provide financial protection for people and livestock affected will become increasingly crucial. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. The tropical storm became a tropical depression this morning in North Korean Khanun, that is, but it dropped torrential showers and violent winds to east coast regions. East of Gangwon-do province and southeast coast, they were received nearly 400 millimeters of downpours since Wednesday. And those near the water still need to stay on a high alert. A high seas watch remains in place in the East Sea and West Sea, while a strong wind advisory remains in place for west coast regions. And there will be lingering showers into early Saturday in the upper parts of the country. 5 to 60 millimeters of rain showers are in the forecast. Southern regions, meanwhile, will see passing showers during the day today. Thursday. Now, we can say those in the south are free from the typhoon's impact today. Summer weather has returned under sunny skies with highs rising into the 30s again this afternoon. Calm and mostly sunny weather return this weekend, and there will not be any major heat wave from now. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour. But do stay with us for our panel session on the planned trilateral summit among South Korea, the US and Japan over at Camp David next week. Thank you for now.
입니다. 하나 스탠바이. 하나 스타트.
표현법을 담은 곡입니다.
동시에 느낄 수 있는 곡인데요.
내 목소리는 널 입술.
뮤직.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
Welcome.
엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
한국에 오면 먹어야죠.
먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
President Yoon Suk-yeol is poised to travel to the US next week for a summit with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida and US counterpart Joe Biden, who is hosting the trilateral talks at his rural retreat of Camp David on August 18th, amid expectations for these talks to become an annual event. So what security issues look to top these talks? How does Japan's planned discharge of its Fukushima radioactive wastewater look to affect the upcoming summit? And does history look to hinder greater partnership between South Korea and Japan?
Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we share with you a preview of next week's planned three-way summit among the leaders of South Korea, the US and Japan at Camp David. For more on this, I have Professor Min Jung-hoon from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy here in the studio with me. Professor Min, it's been a while. Welcome back.
My pleasure as always.
I also have Dr. Stephen Nerpa at Asia Dialogue live on the line. Dr. Nerpa, as always, it's a pleasure.
Sunhee, thank you.
Right, Professor Min, let's begin here in the studio then with perhaps a general overview of the issues that are likely to be addressed by the three leaders on August 18th at Camp David. What security concerns look to top their talks?
Yes, as you mentioned, the trilateral meeting among the three leaders will be held at Camp David on August 18th. And it will be the first standalone trilateral summit among the three countries because in the past, the leaders of the three countries only met on the margins of other international or regional meetings. In addition, it will be the first summit meeting to be held at Camp David since President Biden took office. So it is likely that the upcoming trilateral summit will be a historic event in itself, and it will be a good opportunity to enhance trust and friendships among the three leaders. Now, regarding the agenda of the summit, it is expected that the three leaders will talk about policy coordination about the North Korean nuclear and missile threats and their cooperation on economic security and other major regional and global issues. And for your question, the top security concerns, I think it will be the North Korean military threats. So it is likely that the three leaders will exchange their opinions about the North Korean the military threats and reaffirm that North Korea should give up developing illegal weapons and stop the military provocations, and also the Pyongyang should come back to the negotiating table. And they will also talk about how they will improve their cooperation to cope with the North Korean nuclear and missile threats, like developing North Korean missile warning information system among the three countries.
Right, and staying with North Korea, Dr. Nerpa, last week there was a series of concerns shared by U.S. defense, foreign and security spokespeople about a possible arms deal between North Korea and Russia. What are the prospects of such a deal between those two countries, and what would be its broader repercussions?
Well, it was an interesting development. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu was in Pyongyang, as was a senior Chinese delegation, and they were both in the presence of DPRK leader Kim Jong-un. It did appear that the Russians saw not only the missiles, but also a display of unmanned drones and other types of weaponry that they'd like to employ in Ukraine. So the next step will be, do they secure munitions? Do they secure drone technology forward into Ukraine from the DPRK? That would be deemed a tremendous concern by those in the West. And so trying to find ways to stem that and to try to emphasize that this creates a security dilemma. But it does show that the DPRK, which has been resolute in its support of Russia by way of the invasion of Ukraine, has stood in ways very concerning to the U.S. But do remember the DPRK is only one of 5 states that did not go with the United Nations General Assembly resolution condemning Russia. So Russia has few friends in this world right now. But unfortunately, it appears that the relationship with the DPRK is one that has grown stronger.
Right, and staying with that, Professor Min, the visit by Russia's Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu to Pyongyang late last month to mark the 70th anniversary of the Korean War armistice appears to have ruffled a few feathers, if I may say so myself. And it was reportedly the first such visit by Russia to Pyongyang since 1991, I believe. What more can you share with us about the significance of this visit, and what message does it share with the broader community?
Yes, and as you mentioned, Pyongyang invited Russian and also Chinese delegations to the 70th anniversary of the Korean War armistice, and I think we can find some implications from the invitations. First of all, we need to think about your trilateral summit, the meeting format between the two camps, like the South Korea, U.S., and the Japan, and the North Korea, China, and Russia. So first of all, I think that Pyongyang wanted to show off the enhanced relations among North Korea, China, and Russia to the global community in response to the improved relations among the South Korea, U.S., and Japan. And North Korea has been taking advantage of the security environments like the U.S.-China strategic competition and the Ukraine war, and strengthening its relations with China and Russia for its economic survival and the military buildup. So I think that Pyongyang wanted to show that the relations of the 3 countries are still strong and robust, and they will continue to work together against the trilateral cooperation among South Korea, U.S., and Japan. In addition, the Russian defense minister's visit to Pyongyang for such a long time shows that the 2 countries militarily work together for their own interests. I think Russia wanted to make sure North Korea's military support for its war in Ukraine, and in return, North Korea want to get Russia's military technologies like the long-range missiles and the space launch vehicle and the satellites. And North Korea also want to get some food from Russia, like the flour and the corns for its own people. So I think that the 2 countries, North Korea and Russia, will strengthen their cooperation in the coming months and years.
Right, I see. Dr. Nerpa, do you suppose that President Yoon Suk-yeol has made a similar statement of support through his visit to Ukraine, which also took place last month, that is July? I mean, and if that is the case, how does his in-person call on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky look to impact his hopes of nurturing Korea into a global pivotal state?
Well, I think it's quite a bit different than this contrast we've been discussing by way of DPRK-Russia relations. because that one is strictly based on the aggression in Ukraine. Whereas the South Korean president, aside the Ukrainian president, emphasizes the rule of law. It shows South Korea as a democratic harbinger and as a country that is dedicated to peace and the rule of law internationally. And so in that sense, it's quite a bit different. It shows an incline that is important as a strong Asian bulwark in support of Ukraine. And it shows, again, in light of trilateral coordination with Japan and the United States, a resoluteness around the Ukraine issue and the need to end that war because it is our most complicating aspect of war and peace in modern times.
Right, of course. Against that backdrop, Professor Min, some scholars, they say that the Yun administration should seek to play a more balanced role in diplomacy. Should it seek to take on the role of a constructive middle power? What do you say?
Well, it seems natural that the scholars have the various perspectives about that. But anyway, in my opinion, regarding South Korea's positions, specifically between U.S. and China, I think the Yoon administration is getting closer to the United States, and it also wants to maintain mutually beneficial relationships with China. It's like the elected officials, their policy, their decisions based on the various factors they have. And anyway, as you know, North Korea's military threats are intensified, and the U.S.-China strategic competition is getting deeper and tougher around the high-tech industries like semiconductors and large volume batteries. So it is inevitable that South Korea should strengthen its tie with the United States to stably manage the security situation on the Korean Peninsula. And economically and technologically speaking, South Korea also needed to closely work together with the United States in order to preserve and develop its future growth engine in high-tech industries, because, as you know, U.S. has got so much the foundational technologies in high-tech industries and leading the efforts to reshape the global supply chain in those fields. So without working together with the United States, it would be very hard for South Korea to preserve its vital economic interests. That's the fact we got in the global community. And in addition, based on the strengthening the relations with the United States and the robust ROK-US alliance, South Korea want to take more active roles in the Indo-Pacific region. And as you know, Yoon administration publicized its first Indo-Pacific strategy toward the end of last year. And South Korea is expanding its diplomatic scope with the various countries in the region. And South Korea, as you mentioned, want to establish itself as a global pivotal state, and it is likely that it will play more active roles in the regional and the global stages.
Right, of course, hopefully. Meanwhile, Dr. Nepa, back on the upcoming trilateral summit among Presidents Yoon, Biden and Prime Minister Kishida, Japanese media reports claim that the three parties are running into huddles and framing out a joint statement as Tokyo seeks to include a clause about support for its Fukushima radioactive wastewater discharge plan. Now, some pundits say that this issue should be left out of the trilateral talks this time around. What do you say?
Well, I don't think there's a tremendous amount to be gained in terms of trying to seek statements of support when, in fact, Korea does have concerns, but are willing to acknowledge what the international community has assessed in terms of the safety. I think it's probably better pursued by Korea expressing itself at the bilateral and at the trilateral level directly with Japan, but probably left out of statements as a stumbling block that can be avoided. When, in fact, there's very much an agenda at hand where Japan and Korea need one another for economic revitalization, for jobs, for diversification of supply chains. And so it's very important that they stay on track with this and that they try to use the historic and very important symbolism of Camp David to get the most that they can in terms of stating their positions together, and to show that they can go back and present to their populations a very good face of having had a very good summit.
Right, hopefully, of course. Professor Min, do you see concerns over Tokyo's planned discharge of Fukushima radioactive water, as well as perhaps its territorial claims over Tokto and its denial of the plight of comfort women as eventually hindering the possibility of greater potential partnership between the two countries?
Well, the historical disputes between South Korea and Japan were in the past, and it's still in the present time and will be there in the future. As you know, it will take time to resolve certain historical issues between the two countries. It's mainly because both countries have their own domestic political considerations in relation to the issues, and therefore it would be very hard to narrow down the gaps between the two countries. So I think that like many other experts about the issues, I also think that the two countries needed to take the two-track approach to maintain and improve their partnerships. And first, regarding the historical issues, they needed to manage the issue. And it will be the kind of a long-term issue, so they need to communicate continuously and try to find the alternatives and the solutions as much as possible in the long term. Meanwhile, South Korea and Japan needed to improve their partnerships actively in security and economic matters. Both countries can work together to cope with the North Korean nuclear and missile threats, mainly through the trilateral the cooperation among South Korea, U.S., and Japan. In addition, they can enhance their cooperation in high-tech industries like the semiconductors and the AI and others. South Korea has got, as you know, the world-class the manufacturing capabilities in advanced technologies, and Japan is also well known for its own capabilities in material, part, and equipment in those fields. So I think that based on the management of the historical disputes and the active cooperation in economic and security matters, the two countries can improve their partnerships. But they need to make sure that only when both countries make consistent efforts, such a planning work, and their partnership will be gradually improved.
Right. And Dr. Nerpa, speaking as an observer on the outside, if I may, of course, do you believe that South Korea and Japan have more to gain by moving beyond their current disputes over territory and history? You mentioned economic prospects earlier on.
Yes, I think there's much more that brings them together now, especially coming out of the pandemic and the fact that we're all needing to find a better balance economically. There's common concerns among all three countries that are meeting at this summit in terms of their economic resilience, in terms of making sure that inflation's on a downtick, in terms of diversifying supply chains, in terms of striking at better employment opportunities, and trying to be more innovative. And as the professor mentioned, you know, the natural complementarity of certain industries like semiconductors mean that loosening export controls is important, and that there's so much more to be gained by them working together. I think also when one looks at historical issues and one looks at issues like Fukushima, there are opportunities to talk about things like common maritime cooperation. There are opportunities to talk about nuclear safety, and that's what Fukushima reminds us, that with civilian nuclear energy, we need to be aware of that we need to have coordination on climate change and natural disaster to prevent just this type of thing from happening again. And that extends into the security field, where, yes, the very valid concern is about the DPRK advancement. We've just seen that with the Hwasong 18 launch. But what about a nuclear accident in North Korea? And what would be the implications for Japan and for Korea? And so trying to strike some creativity and some real bottom line in this relationship, and to reach a bit harder in terms of striking at common diplomatic objectives. And ultimately, as much as we're talking about the security concerns of the DPRK, cooperation, coordination, and exercises, we also need to be talking about ways to have all three strike at creative diplomacy to get the DPRK back to the table so that we can try to find some sort of measured resolution to this and lower tensions on and around the Korean Peninsula.
Right, of course, hopefully. And Dr. Nep, I never seem to tire asking our foreign scholars this particular question. I understand it may be tough, but like Professor Min proposed a two-track policy with regard to resolving dispute between the two countries, that is South Korea and Japan. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that, look, moving beyond and striking at policies that are necessarily complex because of the opportunities that exist in good, strong relationships such as that between Japan and Korea, and trying to build a trilateral that works with the best interest of all three, and realizing that the national interests and the security priorities may be common, but don't always align. And so having an ability to create space. There are also points where Japan and Korea actually differ from the United States. For example, the restriction on exports to China, because that limits national growth and the opportunity to really strike at areas where they have a comparative advantage, like semiconductors. And so trying to strike a better understanding and to establish the fact that there are national economic interests that need to be acknowledged by all three, including the United States.
Right. Professor Min, moving forward, what are the prospects of Japan joining the nuclear consultative group agreed between South Korea and the U.S.?
Well, the bottom line here that I want to say is that it's too early for Japan to join the NCG. As you know, the Nuclear Consultative Group just had its first meeting recently. And in the meeting, they talked about how the two countries, South Korea and the United States, will work together for the information sharing, making plans, and implementing nuclear capabilities. It means that they just opened the first chapter of how the two countries make cooperation to successfully implement the extended deterrence. So it means that they still have a long way to go before they establish the system or institution. So it's too early to talk about the possibility that Japan will join the NCG. If Japan joins the group at this point of time, it will take much more time to establish the system, because they need to consider how to integrate Japan's interests into the system or institution. So it will just make the situation more complicated. In addition, if Japan joins the NCG at this very, very beginning stage of the system, it will give an unnecessary concern to China that the group is targeting China beyond the Korean Peninsula and the developing cooperation among the three countries. So I don't think that it's a good idea to make unnecessary the issue a problem when we begin a big project. So taken together, it's necessary to develop and establish the extended deterrence in the bilateral format between South Korea and the United States. And then after firmly establishing the system, if the three countries still wants that kind of possibility, then they will be able to talk about the possibility of Japan joining the NCG in the future.
Right, in the future then. All right, Professor Min, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Dr. Nep over in Hawaii, thank you very much for your time, and also our prayers to all the people in Maui, of course.
Oh, thank you for that. Aloha, and thank you, Sunny.
Right. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's editions of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.